Level design is made quicker with SnapMap with its wide selection of prefabricated modules, which, whilst restricting, is a blessing, as SnapMap's editor doesn't allow for gimbal or coordinate-based asset movement. Instead, it's all handled by mouse aim, which is a little finicky and imprecise. The modules don't remove intentionality, however. A lot of thought and trial and error went into their selection. I had planned the general outline of the encounters before starting, so I knew what I wanted to achieve with each space so far as difficulty and game feel were concerned. For instance, I knew with the first room I wanted a large, open space to fight the first Hell Knight. It's the first major encounter of the game, and whilst I wanted to present the player with this horror combat section, it was best not to make that a particularly challenging one. The opposite is true of the final major encounter of the chapter, which presents a better armed and practiced player with two heavy demons in a tight and confined space. I had full control over the placement of cover, pickups, interactable objects, hazards and enemies throughout the level. In the arenas, pickups were placed where I wanted to encourage the player to move, however largely placed on the side of the path as to avoid accidentally collecting them. This level is intentionally fairly generous with how many pickups are available, as I'm aware that this is a fresh and challenging experience to the player. Future installments of Hellbent would dial that down as a way of demanding more skill from the player, something that is a precedent in all of the modern Doom games. Objects placed for cover were intentionally positioned to aid the player in breaking line of sight to enemies, but also to break up rooms. In this Plasma Pinky arena, cover was used in this central room to split it into two lanes, giving a greater chance of safe passage whenever the player entered it. I've used it in the corners as well to tighten up the space to enhance the challenge presented by the room. Time was also spent on making sure that rooms like this have plenty of landmarks to help orientate the player when the combat encounter was done, so that they could proceed to the next room, such as this Plasma Goo corner or the Crate corner. Each part of this small room was made to look very different in layout, colour and size. Similarly, a lot of consideration went into the framing of each room and their entrances, so that the player knows exactly what to expect or what they should do in each room. Here's just a couple of examples. This podium room is entered 3 times in total. When the player first enters it, they see a blue man, a blue core and a blue podium directly in front of them, contrasting the environment around. By putting the core into the podium, the camera angle mandated by that animation will show the blue door opening and a route available for them to take. When they return to this room after collecting the red core, directly in front of them is the red door and the empty red podium. These were orientated to prevent confusion when you first entered the room, but are clear to you now. That door then opens in sight, and immediately on the other side you see a red man holding your next weapon. And as you return to the room again, your next door will unlock and open, guiding you to the next section. For combat encounters, the same principle applied. As you enter this room, the first thing you see directly ahead of you are ammo and health pickups, and in between the two enemies are spawning in. Off to the right, the blue glow and effects of a gravity lift contrasting the dark and red room. I want the player to immediately know that this is a combat arena, and to quickly be able to read the threats and aids available to them. The limitations imposed by the editor mean that this level is short. Even so, care was taken with the flow and pacing of its spaces and encounters. I didn't want the player to feel as if they were just being shuffled from one combat arena to another one, and so the 2 major arenas that exist are separated by a substantial amount of gameplay. After the first major arena, a long combat section takes place through the security corridor, to give you the sense that you have to push through your enemies to get to the next destination. And after that fight, the player has a short moment of combat respite as they experience the first nonsensical level section. These were fun to create and add a lot to the intended imposing feel of the level. The geometry or the layout of these sections can appear confusing, so as to guide the player through them, I always made sure that something happened as they continued through the right way. Doors would lock behind them, and voice lines, sound effects, and scripted visuals would activate as the player made their way forward. One of the major improvements from Doom 2016 to its sequel, Doom Eternal, was how its combat was designed to be more engaging through the use of what, in software terms, combat puzzles. My desire to replicate this for my levels informed the design decisions I made when I set out on this project. This design philosophy required that I build the solution for these puzzles into the encounters intentionally, which isn't to say that there's only one way to complete them, and I regularly tested to make sure that wasn't the case. But if you grew up like I did on hand-me-down walkthrough books for games, they would often suggest the most efficient way to complete the encounter. These game guide encounters, or as I've come to call it, sciencing the fight, keeps the player engaged in figuring out what it is they could be doing better or simply differently to win. In the first major encounter, that's as simple as chasing down the fodder to keep your health and ammo supplies up while you pepper down the Hell Knight's health. In the second, that's about making efficient use of the explodable engineer enemies. And in the third, it's about figuring out which enemies spawn a new wave on their death and then picking the right moment to kill them. They're simple, but they keep the player thinking, and that's exactly what I want them to do. To achieve this, almost every enemy spawn point was hand placed, and the order of which they spawned on the execution chain was agonized over. SnapMap does have its own encounter management systems available to use, but I didn't want to allow for randomness in the spawn order or enemy placement to impact the challenge. Additional considerations were made to fit the game's adjusted design, including creating a script to maintain AI levels so that the player would always have fodder demons available to kill to collect health and ammo. This level could not have been achieved without the use of SnapMap's scripting system. Scripts in SnapMap are created by a series of nodes that visually appear and connect each other within the world space. It is very flexible, and my experience using node graphs, such as Unreal 5's blueprints or Halo Infinite's own node system, was very applicable here once I had established where the differences lay. As I alluded to earlier, I had to create my own wave management system for each encounter to allow me to create the design. It was also used to maintain AI whenever that was needed. Additionally, the checkpoint system, the crazy level design, the use of music, FX, voice lines, and the cinematic encounter at the end, all scripted by me using these tools. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video on the Hellbent project. If you're looking for more of my work, on my portfolio, I would recommend for level design stuff, the custom map I made for Halo Infinite using the Forge tools. That is a full block out, no modular pieces, that is 100% block out with custom encounters. It's a really, really cool level. Thoroughly recommend having a look at that if you want to see more of my block out skills, which this project doesn't really include. If you want to see more gameplay focused stuff, I would direct your attention to Disco, which I worked on for about 4 months this year with a team of 3 people just to polish the game up and get it ready for retail release. That game, by the way, nominated in the Tiger Awards in the same category as Death Stranding 2, which is kind of insane. Super proud of that game. Really happy with the work I did on it with the team. So if you want to have a look at that, there'll be videos on that available. Thank you and goodbye.